Greetings and welcome to this digital talk, which is part of the series Discovering the Circular Nature of COVID-19 and is brought to you by Elastica and Bocconi University Press. I am Marcello di Paola and I'm joined here today by Ilaria Capua and Dale Jamieson for a dialogue on Ilaria's latest book, Circular Health, Empowering the One Health Revolution, which was published by Bocconi University Press in 2020. I thank the organizers for inviting me to a dialogue with such distinguished guests. Ilaria Capua is director of the One Health Center at the University of Florida. She's a veterinarian by training, and she has worked in the field of veterinary virology and zoonotic viral infections for over 30 years. She's known for her work on influenza viruses, particularly avian influenza, and her efforts at promoting data sharing and open access to genetic information on emerging viruses as part of pre-pandemic preparedness efforts. At the One Health Center, she promotes integrated and interdisciplinary approach to health science, some cornerstones of which are presented in Circular Health and will be the objects of a dialogue today. We'll dialogue with Dale Jamieson, who is founding director of environmental studies, professor of environmental studies and philosophy, affiliated professor of law and of medical ethics at New York University, where he's also director of the Center for Environmental and Animal Protection. So let us begin. Ilaria, would you like maybe to introduce your book to our viewers and perhaps give a presentation of the main motivations you had when writing it, and perhaps how its messages carry over to our present situation, considering that the book was written in pre-COVID times. So please.
Thank you, Marcello, and thank you, Dale, for being here and for helping me spread some ideas and look for new ideas, because this is really what this book is about. This book is about, is this time for us to rethink health? And so I have a few slides, and I think you can see them. Jamie, yes, you can. Dale, you can see them? You can see my slides. Good. Okay, so the concept of health has evolved over time significantly. If we consider what health looked like 2,500 years ago and what we talk about today, we realize that in 2,000 years, lots of things have happened. And I like to refer to this diagram, which is a diagram of health as the ancient Greek philosophers had imagined it. They had no tools. They had only ideas, and they had what they could observe and, of course, what they could think about. And in this diagram, we see that at the center, there are three words, which are man, time, and world. And around it are a series of words which summarize some of the elements, the four elements: earth, water, air, and fire. And I will come back to this at the very end, because to accelerate the expansion of the concept of health, there have been a series of disruptive innovators that have really crossed disciplines. And this is the point I want to make when I address circular health, and I try and present to you this idea. This disruptive innovator, Andrea Vesalio, brought art into science and showed perspective in his anatomical drawings. This perspective basically made science more accessible and made anatomy more accessible. And what he did was he refuted the old anatomical ideas, which were 2,000 years old. And so he was a great innovator. was exiled, died of plague. At the age of 50, he wrote this anatomy book by when he was 28, and his body was never found because it was thrown in a public grave. This other guy here, you can see by the face of his wife, who is looking at him with dismay because he doesn't want to let go of the frog and of this thing that he has in his eye, which is actually a microscope. So this person here was a textile merchant who was fascinated by what he felt with his textiles in his hands, and he wanted to see it. And so he invented the system of lenses and discovered the invisible world. A textile merchant discovered the invisible world. And actually, he went crazy because he started drawing everything he could magnify. Here, this is sperm cells. This is grains of sand. These are the first protozoa, the first bacteria that he thought he saw. And this is a flea. He drew them as he was observing them. And he became the gateway to an invisible world, and nobody would believe him. Nobody would believe him, and he had to go to the Royal Society and have 3 audits before anybody believed that there was something bigger or something smaller than what human eye could read. And this guy is another disruptive innovator, Jenner, who invented vaccination. But what he really did was he broke that barrier between animals and humans. You see in this picture here, there's a cow in the corner. You see the cow up here? So what Jenner did was he took a virus which was in a cow, and that was creating lesions on milkmaids' hands and used it as a vaccine. This was heretic. And look at the picture. We talked today about how innovation and science are attacked. Look at this picture here. Look at all the bulls that are coming out of people's noses and mouths and arms because people were so skeptical about this disgusting practice of using animal material. And this brings me to my last disruptive innovator, who is John Snow. John Snow discovered that cholera was carried by water by using a map. Nobody had used a map to understand how an outbreak was working. And that's why he closed this pump, the pump in Broad Street, and stopped the outbreaks of cholera overnight. Nobody had ever thought that an infection could be transmitted through water. And so let's go back to my first diagram. The ancient philosophers said that the quality of earth, the quality of water, the quality of air, and the quality of fire, the world is burning now, by the way, is essential for its health. And so I think the big challenge we have now in the post-COVID-19 era, because we are measuring everything, we are sensing everything, we are filming the pandemic, is to use big data to try and connect these different domains that of course are naturally connected because we all live in the same planet and we all live in a closed system. And this brings me to my last slide, which is an invitation for all of us to start looking at this moment in time as the opportunity to advance health as a system in a circular manner. To do this, we need to be brave. We need to understand that things have to add up, that we have to be respectful of the system, and that we need disruptive innovators that bring progress and not despair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ilaria. Thank you, of course. Dale, would you like to comment on this sort of triumphal history of science that we had?
Well, I just thank you very much for both the book and the presentation, Ilaria. And I just want to put a few ideas out there, a little bit as crumbs or as bait that either Ilaria or Marcello might want to pick up on. The Barry Commoner, who was one of the founders of the American environmental movement, had these things that he called the laws of ecology. And one of the laws of ecology is that everything is connected to everything else. And I think one of the really magnificent themes of Ilaria's book is the way that holism runs through every aspect of the book. So science doesn't just live in a silo. It's informed by, affected by, causally interacts with the humanities, with the social sciences, and so on. Human health, in one phrase, Ilaria, one wonderful turn of phrase that Ilaria has in her book, that health is not a garden. It's not something that I tend, my personal garden, my personal health. Rather, health is a system. It's holistic. It connects to the health of other people and to other living things on the planet. Now I have but there are two questions that I would like to raise about that, or at least points of emphasis I would like to bring out. The first is the irony that we're having this conversation over Zoom, which is an incredibly sophisticated technology, and we're having it at a time in which science has never been more advanced. We have never moved towards a vaccine more quickly than we are moving with the COVID vaccine. Discoveries in virology are happening at an enormously rapid pace. But yet we're having this discussion confined in our spaces, in our living rooms, at a time in which the global economy is in serious decline. Now, that is a really amazing story of holism and of interconnection. The science alone does not and cannot save us. It requires a social context. It requires a history for all of this to be embedded in. So the first point I want to make, and first invitation to both Ilaria and Marcello to elaborate on or to comment on, just has to do, I think, with that even though the book was not written at the time of COVID, we've never really ever been at a moment in which the book would have been more appropriate, because now more than ever, we actually see how important it is that the science is embedded in the economy and the society and the culture and all of these social facts. And none of these things alone can really overcome the problems that we face. The second issue that I want to raise, just really briefly, just to get on the table, is the amazing One Health issue that circular health is about. I mean, Ilaria's been in a real leadership role in promoting this idea that I am not an island as an individual human. Humans are not an island, but we're connected to animals. Animals are not an island, they're connected to plants. Plants are not an island, they're connected to ecosystems. None of us survive unless all of us survive. And I guess the question I would like to ask is, may seem like a nerdy philosopher's question, and if so, sort of ignore it. But to what extent is this a kind of sort of instrumental point? I mean, if I want to get the box out of the attic, I need a ladder. And in this case, the ladder is One Health, so to speak. If I'm concerned about my health, then I have to be concerned about everybody's health. But contrary to that, or in opposition to that, to what extent is there an ethical lesson in this? To what extent is there a moral lesson in this? Is the problem that we haven't had the right attitudes towards the earth and towards other forms of life, and so as a result, this is coming back to bite us? Or to what extent is it that we haven't had an appropriate moral stance and moral perspective to the forms of life with which we share the planet? And I just wonder from reading the book, Ilaria, whether this is fundamentally an instrumental argument or whether this is fundamentally a moral.
So I don't know if Marcello, would you like to intervene, and then I can.
Well, I mean, I can only complicate it, because I think besides this question, there is also an impression one gets from the book of the beauty, or you wanting to recount the beauty of a narrative, which is a wonderful narrative of creativity, of people interacting across the centuries in a way. So there is also an aesthetics of science that, or at least some kind of science, non-lateralized science, perhaps, as you call it, which then in turn is not even just aesthetics. It seems to be more of a human journey into the unknown. So there are a number of levels in the book, and definitely there is an instrumental versus moral issue. There is an aesthetical versus functional, or whatever works best, whether this is an experiment or whether this is really the lesson of history. I'm talking One Health now, referring, right? So whether we should infer it from history or see it as an experiment from the future, right? So I guess it's just very many levels for you to comment on.
Yeah, it is on very many levels. And actually, just for the people who are listening to us who are in the medical and veterinary or public health community, let's say that One Health traditionally refers to human-animal interface mainly. So One Health, the definition of One Health, I think, needs to be expanded. And that's why I came up with this idea of circular health, because One Health has become, let's say, more prominent over the last 20 years because of all these crises, of which COVID-19 is just the last one. But there's much more to it. And to go back to some of the points that Dale made, what I want to say is that I don't think that there is a moral responsibility. There is a moral responsibility to the way we manage the planet, and the moral responsibility is perceived by my generation in a different way that it was from my parents' generation, and which was perceived differently from the people before. And so the point I'm trying to make is that what is acceptable to me today is not going to be acceptable as a relationship with our system, okay, with our amniotic sac, is what we find acceptable today is not going to be acceptable for the next generations. And we have to do something, because we have inherited a situation which we're not really comfortable with, but that's how we got where we are. So we can't really pull out of it. What I think we have to do is we have to have we have to be humble enough to say, look, we cannot go back to the path of least resistance. And COVID-19 gives us a perfect window to do this, because if we will start doing things like they have been done before COVID-19, we will not take advantage of this window of opportunity that COVID-19 has given us. COVID-19 is telling us, guys, you have lots of problems, and your problems are inside cities. Your problems are in healthcare. Your problems are with inequality. Your problems are you have racial tension. It is telling us that we have all these problems, and all these problems are ignited by a health problem. And so circular health, because this was written before the pandemic, right? So now it's like all coming together, because many scientists, but also professionals from other disciplines want to engage, because, as you say, we are facing such an economic catastrophe that we can't really afford another one of these. And so we're going to have to fix a series of things. And whilst we're at it, we should start fixing things by trying to fix the system rather than the silo that makes that system.
Right.
And so there is both, I think, a moral drive, but there is also, I mean, the time is ripe. COVID-19 has given us, as I said, advantage. We would have not done certain things if COVID-19 hadn't happened, or we would have done them like 30 or 40 years, 20, 30 years down the line. There's been like a lot, okay, let's say that live animal markets, which are the source, right? Humans that live in poverty, animals, and lots of liquids produced from animals, right? That's where these things come from. And so now suddenly they say, oh, but maybe we shouldn't do these things anymore. Yeah, but there's lots of other things that we shouldn't be doing and that can come and be dovetailed into this circular approach.
And yeah.
Go on, Rachel.
No, well, I mean, I had also a thought while reading the book, right, and the systemic approach that you advocate, of course, is and the way you just put it is we deal with a bunch of issues that are obviously related with one another, and this sort of shines very bright in certain situations as in silos, sort of a silos-based approach. There is also a lot of people that say that we deal with a lot of those problems in an emergency-like mode, right? And these are sort of two maybe sides of the same coin. So maybe the circular health approach is also one that is very focused on systemic prevention, if I understand right. And so you do see in this emergency-based approach one of the main problems, right? And the related short-termism, which is, of course, maybe the root of that.
Yes, and prevention is actually, I think, the key to a sustainable health. Because rather than precision medicine, personalized medicine, we should be looking at precision public health. So if Ilaria has a familiar predisposition to diabetes, and my mother developed diabetes when she was 50, I will most likely develop it when I'm 50, unless I do certain things. And the things I need to do are connected with a series of activity that actually includes citizen science. So I can work for my own health, I can stay away from certain risk factors, and hopefully I will become diabetic when I will be 70 and not 50. And this saves money for the health service, but it also makes a better quality of life. And so what I am looking at is looking at small, okay, you can't put, of course, everything is interconnected and you can't look at everything at once, right? But there are some very, very well-defined areas in which we can look for new ways to do things. So as Dale, as somebody who has powerfully spoken about the environment, the importance of the environment, biodiversity. So is it possible, that we do not have a system of taking care of invasive or dangerous insects like mosquitoes and not butterflies and bees in the United States? I mean, do you think that this makes sense? We're going to probably send, I don't know if people, but we're going to send more stuff to Mars in a couple of years, right? And we are killing because this is the path of least resistance.
Right. Right. Path of least resistance is a really good term here, and I keep coming back to this idea that most of the things that we consider ways of making the world better are not sort of most immediately dependent on new scientific breakthroughs. They're most immediately dependent on getting our societies in order. So, I mean, precision medicine, precision public health, I'm all for those things, and we will get those things. But in a country like the United States, will we get prenatal care for everyone? And, there is kind of this remarkable disconnect between the frontiers of knowledge and the frontiers of possibility.
Yes.
And the muck that seems to prevent us from really implementing them. And this makes me, I want to turn this into a question about science, about the history of science, because one of the things I love about the book is, it's very rare for a scientist of your stature to be as knowledgeable and respectful of the history of science and as understanding of the social context in which these discoveries emerge. And this isn't a disagreement. But so much as to juxtapose two things. Your history of science is a very progressive history of human improvement, but yet somehow here in COVID world, in the 21st century, we seem to have hit this wall, and now we need to reinvent a bunch of things. Now, there are people like Carolyn Merchant comes most immediately to mind, but there are others who have written histories of science in which they actually see the problems that you diagnose, the being in silos, the following the course of least resistance, the disrespect for nature, which in the case of Carolyn Merchant's work is also disrespect for women as well, which is associated with that. Someone like her actually sees this history as at best a kind of potted story, a story of brilliance and progress in some respects, but also sees the very problems we face today as being implicit in that history. And I just wonder what your reaction to that is. Is that different from the way that you see things, or do you see things, in something like that way? It's just that it's not exactly in the main narrative of the book.
Okay, so I am not very knowledgeable in history, but I have a classics graduate who works in my department, and her name is Sara Agnelli, and she may even be connected. And it was very difficult to get a classics graduate with a PhD in Galen, in the history of what he did, in a center which is funded by 3 scientific colleges. It was very difficult. But it is and has been very, very rewarding, because we have been able to, let's say, look at certain things also from the historical perspective, from the social perspective. For example, there's hardly any women in my book. There's one woman who is Lady Mary Montagu, but all of them were men. So it was very important for me, even if the book is easy because it is for the general public. It's a book of ideas. It's a book that wants to make you see things under with a new pair of glasses. But it's very important for me to look and to observe the context at the time. And I don't know if you know, but John Snow with cholera, basically which was an outbreak in London, they were calling it the Asian something or other, because they thought it was brought by immigrants who came from the Asian fever from Asia. And let me tell you something else, just a word on academia. John Snow's first publication on cholera with the map was rejected. So, okay. So you asked me a very, very profound question, because scientists tend to run. And they run because they get their energy, they get their buzz from new. And unfortunately, we leave things behind. And that's the whole point of the book. So the book is that science cannot bring other disciplines in at the end, like when there's no masks, okay? Science needs to bring in other disciplines at the start, when they start addressing certain issues. So going back to COVID, can we address COVID without looking at the fragility of certain cities? Why were certain cities, Milan, London, New York, Paris, Madrid, and other cities were not? Why? So we have to work with people who, the urbanists, architects, we have to bring health. So we have to bring health to them, and that's what we've been trying to do. But now with COVID, they want to come to us because they understand that they could have a role. And so going back to your question about, okay, science is really cool and we do really cool things, and we have some magic stuff which costs millions and millions for like one treatment. Yeah, and this is another story, and this is not really about science. This is about pharma, and is about a series of protocols and bureaucracy. The amount of bureaucracy that is attached to science, that we have attached to science, is incredible, and that's why the costs go up. And so I have to say that I would see teams of people that look more at the context and look more at the social component of health, with people who are in the lab and with people who, you know, are in the hospital, and not only, and beyond, because we cannot exclude, you know, plants provide 80% of the food on the world. And so, you know, we cannot work without producing and going towards, at least as the Western, you know, Western part of the world, we have to try and produce plants that are not full of poison, at least. And to make that point, if that poison makes that plant cheap, the poison is going to stay on that plant. If that poison hurts you, and everybody understands this, then maybe that poison will not be used as much. And this is a long-term, I mean, this is not something that is going to happen in a couple of years. This is a long-term, very long-term process. And I'll just add one thing, which is, we all know that mental health was included in the concept of health much later. And if you look at history, and this is in the book, we had health of the soul at the start. And then it became health of the body. And then, hey, what about body and soul? And then it became mind. And so now it could be and the amniotic sac. And so this is an invitation to people who understand the One Health philosophy, but also to people who understand that interdisciplinarity and lateral thinking is very important, to bring in new ideas, because or else we will go back to the path of least resistance, which is not very good if you look at where we are in the COVID environment. We need to be somewhere else.
Well, and if I may ask a question on this, you just mentioned how important it is to bring in different disciplines and different scholars and experiences into science to inform a more complex science. But with issues like COVID and any complex problem that our societies are facing, and climate change could be another urgency is to communicate the science to the public. And so I was wondering, and of course the role of experts in our democracies is kind of contested and right now, even though it's when we need them most, and pretty much everybody understands also the irony and paradox that's involved, but still we don't seem to manage to communicate to one another the right science or science in the right way. So I was wondering, what are the potentials for perhaps the humanities or the non-scientific languages of culture to help us sort of receive the facts of science in a way that might move us to really understand what is at stake? What could we use to communicate that to the public?
Well, the humanities have an essential role. I mean, that is what humanities make people vibrate. They pull out people's emotions, they pull out their dreams, their hopes. And so there is an enormous role for the humanities. But I think that I am really looking forward to humanities that will be woven with science, like Tweed, not put together. And actually, this is something quite interesting. We have some grants funded by the European Union, by the ERC actually, are grants that have anthropologists to study interdisciplinary groups. Like they used to look at, gorillas and the interdisciplinary, the scientists trying to do interdisciplinary work are considered like gorillas, which I think makes sense. But there's a lot of movement and of interest to try and see if we can come up with some new ideas that the people who work in that discipline would have never thought of. And with reference to COVID, I think that a smart idea came obviously from a Nobel laureate in economics, though, when they said we should impose. Okay, so there's this problem about Christmas and the celebration and getting together. In Europe, it would be a very big problem. And so what they said was, families who want to meet could sort of self-quarantine, restrict their movements for a couple of weeks before Christmas, so that then when they get to the family gathering, they're clean because they haven't seen anyone. And this comes from two Nobel laureates were smart enough, but they came. So no scientist had ever thought about this. So that is really what circular health is looking for. It's looking for pulling in ideas from other disciplines.
And Dale, your thoughts on communicating science in our times and the role of expertise in what is going on? Well,
this is a really difficult question. in part because I think there's a fundamental tension between democracy and expertise, and it's one that has been endemic in American history, is that when you have a polity that is predicated on the idea of equality, it becomes very difficult then to say that some people are more equal than others epistemologically. Or to put it one way, who's to say, sort of in a democracy, we say, why should your opinion count more than mine when we're talking about what to do? Well, why should your opinion count more than mine when it comes to what to believe? And that's something that we've struggled with historically, and we continue to struggle with today. And there are obviously no simple answers to that question. We're getting to the end, and there is just one issue that I just want to raise in the last 4 minutes, and it's, I think, one of the really interesting things about Ilaria's book, and I hope for those of you who are listening, you can see just how many interesting ideas are packed into very few pages. But it has to do with the whole role of citizen science, and because as part of this kind of circular idea, the circular idea goes out from the scientific community to citizens as well. And here's my question. Sometimes it seems to me that citizen science turns out to sort of be a fancy name for getting the folks to go get the data that's hard to find otherwise, or would be too expensive, or whatever. So it's a little bit like, engaging
others to do the work.
Yeah. But it seems to me that there's another thing that it can mean, and that is that it seems to me that citizens can also bring in very different points of view on the experiences, and that are not the same as the scientists. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I think this is kind of a double-edged sword, this is just something to really think about, has to do with the patient as a citizen scientist. Somebody with COVID experiences COVID in a very different way than Tony Fauci experiences COVID, or so on. And as we've recently seen, the President of the United States has been claiming a kind of epistemological authority over what to do about COVID because he has experienced it as a patient. And while I'm not very warm to his particular views, I think this idea that there is a kind of patient perspective that is a different perspective, and somehow we might want to think about incorporating it into our broader epistemologies we're thinking about. So that's just a question, kind of a closing question for you, Ilaria, if you have any thoughts about that.
So let me tell you a good story about Citizen Science Project. We are working with a team of pediatricians who are interested in sexual health of adolescents. And sexual health, not only from the point of view of the diseases, but also from the point of view of your gender identity, and also from the point of view of where do you get your information, because adolescents are aware that there's like sites that are trusted and not. So we got a questionnaire together because we wanted to know what their needs were. Okay, so how can we help you to answer the questions that you don't have the guts to understand, because this is about sex? Okay. And so we have a cohort, 200 questionnaires. We got them back and we were looking at them until an influencer got hold of the questionnaire. We had 11,000 questionnaires come in 24 hours, and they crashed the server. So this is just one example, right? And we can use this to do good stuff. On the other hand, yes, it's different being a patient in Africa. So, there's very few cases of COVID-19 in some African countries, in Kenya, for example, because the average age is 19, right? So, of course, there's no cases. And so what you say about empowering citizens to how can I say, rivendicare their role as a patient, and you know, patient organizations can actually be fortified through the circular health approach, because they can be vocal and they can drive some decisions in a certain direction. What is essential is that, though, we don't lose our grasp on science, because it then, you know, it then becomes emotional, and it becomes it just sort of loses its power. But I see, I mean, if we can think of good enough ideas and projects, I think we can do a lot with citizen science around the circular health idea.
Well, thank you. I think maybe we can close on this one note. So let me thank both Ilaria and remind our viewers of her newest book, Circular Health, Empowering the One Health Revolution. And thank you, Dale, for being with us and participating in this wonderful dialogue. I hope to see you soon, and thanks again.
Thank you, Marcello. Thank you, Dale, and thank you to Elastica, who put this show up. We are on different sides of the ocean. It's midnight in Europe, so thank you for staying up so late. And yeah, stay safe.
You too.
Okay, and wear your mask.
Ciao.
Wear a mask. Look, I have a virus on me. Wear a mask.